Welcome to Parshas Korach. I want to dedicate this class to my Parsha chavruso Jay. We study every week together with Parsha, and this is going to be the story of Parshas Korach, going into the details of the story. So it's not one of the 5-minute overviews, but this is actually going to go into some of the details. So we want to study the situation and get a better understanding of it. So Korach is part of the family, from the family of Levi. So there's Levi, there was Kahas. Kahas had 4 sons. The oldest of his 4 sons was Amram. Amram had Moshe and Aaron as his sons. And then the second son was Yitzhar. Yitzhar's oldest son was Korach. And then there's Hebron and Uziel. But when we look at the story, so Korach is Moshe's first cousin. Moshe is the second son, really, of Amram, and Korach is the first son, the oldest son of Yitzhar. So we're talking about the first cousins here, but we want to understand who Korach was. Korach was not a simpleton. He was a man of superior qualities. He was, first of all, obviously illustrious heritage, right? He had actually was one of those who had been chosen by Hashem to be one of the carriers of Iron Kodesh. All the Levium had jobs as far as transferring the Mishkan when they traveled, and one of his jobs was to actually carry the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark of the Covenant. So this is, a very chashuv, a very prestigious position, right? He was very intelligent. He was a very learned man, and in fact, because of his certain amount of prophecy, he also understood that he was going to be having. From his progeny would come out great men, including Shmuel HaNavi. One of his descendants would be Shmuel HaNavi, Samuel the prophet. And Korach was also fabulously wealthy. So he was not your average guy. He was not your average guy. And a Talmud Chacham, a very wise person, lots of things going for him. He also had a wife who tended to inflate his ego. The Medrash talks about this in more detail. Which is always a challenge. But he became consumed with his desire for glory and for and the envy of those who had more prestigious positions than him. And this is really where the downfall begins, is that when he feels that there's something he wants more, and of course his wife was encouraging him that he deserves to be more honored. And for him, when certain things were passed over in his position and given to other family members rather than him, Elisaphan was the Nasi of Bnei Kahas, so that position he thought he should have been given to him. Itamar was a grandson of Amram, or a son of Aaron, and he was given the overseer of the Bnei Kahas, of the activities that each one of them doing, and so he felt he was looked over. And that certainly disturbed him. So this story begins now in the second year of the Midbar, in the wilderness, when they're traveling. This is after the incident of the Meraglim, which is important because it adds to this. If you remember, when we talked last week about the Meraglim felt that the job of Bnei Yisrael is to actually go into the Midbar, go into the Israel and become farmers and work the land, and that's the job, right? And they felt they couldn't do it, and they were misunderstanding God's capacity for us to be able to accomplish things. God gives you a task, you can certainly fulfill it. And so this was talking about the idea that every single Jew has a divine mission. Every single Jew is a holy soul with a divine mission. And so it's actually after the story of the Meraglim that this comes up, because it plays into the rebellion itself. So a lot of people have died. A lot of things have gone wrong in this 2-year period since leaving Egypt and receiving the Torah. There's a little bit of argument and strife, and people have died. And now, after this whole thing where they've now been, after the Meraglim, the spies, there was a decree that they were all going to die in the desert. Those who were, had been a part of the debacle with the spies, they would all die in the desert, and it's only their children under 20 years old who would actually be going into Israel in 40 years hence. So now is the time when Korach actually starts to step up to see what's going on. And his initial goal is for a better position for himself, but of course that's never going to fly. No one's going to go with that. So to create a rebellion, you have to, tell everybody else what's in it for them. And so this is where he starts his campaign, is to start figuring out every single Jew should be on an equal opportunity to serve in the tabernacle, to bring sacrifices to God, and all these things. Every single Jew should have that opportunity, because every single Jew is holy, which we saw that every single Jew has the task of making a dwelling place for God down in the physical world. And to his own relatives, to the tribe of Levi, so then to them he goes and he says, why weren't you made Kohanim? Why weren't you made the priestly tribe? You're only Levium. You could have been Kohanim. And when he goes to the Bnei Reuven, who of course, the Pirkei Avos talks about choose a good neighbor, and Bnei Reuven are just next door to Kahas and his family, to Korach and his family, and so they have a negative influence, the bad side of things. But he goes to Bnei Reuven, the children of the family of Reuven, and says Reuven was the firstborn son of all of the 12 tribes. The whole idea of the kahuna, the priestly tribe thing, was taken away from him. His tribe should have been the ones who were doing all of the sacrifices in the tabernacle and everything else. So they were. And then he went to the firstborn, the firstborn of every family, because the firstborn of every family was the one who was intended to be the one who would serve in the tabernacle for his family. And in a sense, the firstborn would be the priestly amongst the Jewish people. And so basically, he goes to anybody who could have a contention, who thinks they could have a contention, and he builds up their contention until he's actually got a whole group of 250 followers who are all behind him and this rebellion against Moses. Now, there are those commentaries that say that the 250 were also firstborn sons, but whatever it is, the number is mentioned in the Torah as 250 who are behind him in this rebellion. Okay, and so in addition to this, there's another independent group that's always been rebellious, and this goes back to Dasan and Aviram. Dasan and Aviram were the guys who, all the way back in Egypt, when this first stuff started beginning, and Moses was called upon and getting an inkling to step in for his people, they were the ones they told Pharaoh about Moses and having killed an Egyptian back in Egypt, right? And so already they've been troublemakers. They've been troublemakers from the very get-go. And they have their own feelings about why they should be leadership positions, etc. And so they join in this rebellion, not with any specific intention, nothing special that they should be arguing about, but they join in with this rebellion against Moses and Aaron. So Korach has got his rebellion now. He's got 250 people together, and they're going to rebel against Moses. So how do they do this, right? So one of the mitzvahs that God commands Moses, and Moses then explains to the Jewish people, is the mitzvah of wearing a four-cornered garment. That when wearing a four-cornered garment, it should have tassels, tzitzis, on the four corners of the garment, and that when tying those tzitzis, of the four strings that are wrapped through in town, one of the four strings should be dyed a blue color called techelis. And this techelis is the dye is a special, either it's a fish type of thing, it's in the Kinneret. We're not sure exactly which it is now, so most of the Jewish people don't wear the techelis string at this time. But the techelis was a light blue color like the sky, and it would remind one of God. And the idea of the tassels would be that all four corners of the earth, you are reminded, north, south, east, and west, all four corners, you're reminded about God and serving God. And this idea of wearing a four-cornered garment with tassels, the blue string of techelis, would remind one of God. And this blue techelis completes that garment, right? So Korach and his followers, he made garments completely out of this techelis color. And they go to Moses and they say, so tell us, if one string completes the four-cornered garment with its techelis, does a garment completely colored of techelis need the tassels at all? Does it need tzitzis at all? And of course, the commandment is you wear a four-cornered garment and you put the tzitzis on the four-cornered garment, and one string is techelis. That's the commandment. So of course, a whole garment that's colored techelis still is going to require tzitzis. Of course it is. But they make a mockery of this as if that's ridiculous, because the whole garment made of techelis shouldn't need the strings that have only one of them is techelis. So they make a whole mockery of the whole mitzvah itself, and they blame Moses on this. And this is their in to begin the argument, right? So, and then with that, they follow up with the rest of the idea of who's supposed to be the leader. Why do you think it's why is it Moshe is the leader and Aaron is the Kohen Gadol? And you take too much upon yourself, right? That's the where the rebellion goes to. And when presented with this, Moses says, Hashem did not ask my opinion as to who should be chosen for each of these holy offices. Just as God separated the day from the night, the day is covered by sunlight and the night is covered by the moon and the stars. Just as God separated those, so all the magicians of Egypt can't change day into night or night into day. There are certain things which are separate. They're meant to be separate. And so, too, there are Jews who are separated from the rest of the people of the world. And within the Jewish people, there are Levium who are separate from the rest of Bnei Yisrael. And amongst the Levium, there are Kohanim who are separated from the rest of the Levium. And from all the Kohanim, there's one who's the Kohen Gadol, who's the high priest of the Holy of the Holies of the Holy. So this is all done by God and chosen by God, and there's no... And Moses says, I sympathize with the desire that we should all have the opportunity, every single Jew should have the opportunity to serve God in the fullest, and to do so as a Kohen Gadol, to bring the incense and the sacrifices and things. We all would love to have that opportunity, but that's not the way God created the universe. And we have to be able to be satisfied with our lot and understand that the mission that we have is a special mission of its own, and it's something that only we can do, and that each one of us has our own purpose in being here and have that mission. And so we shouldn't be jealous and envious of other people's mission. We have our own, and it is equally critical, different, but equally critical that we fulfill it. So Moshe brings the example that the nations of the world, they have many gods and they have many priests, and we have one God. We have one Kohen Gadol, and that's the way God has created it, and that's how He chose it. And anyone claims that he should be doing more, or he should be doing the service of the Kohen Gadol, if he feels that he's the holy of holies amongst the Jewish people. So let's do a test tomorrow. In the morning, anyone who thinks that he should be a Kohen and he should have the right to bring keteris, the special aromatic incense spices, in the beautiful copper vessels. So basically, the way the keteris was offered is there was a copper, almost like a copper shovel, right? The copper shovel would take the spice, the aromatic spices, and it would put on the copper vessel, and or shovel, and that would God would send down fire upon it, and it would burn up the spices, and this would be an incense sacrifice unto God. And so whoever feels that they are worthy of that and should be able to do so, make for yourselves a copper vessel, and in the morning we'll present them all, and we'll see who God chooses to light up their incense. And then you'll know who is. But be aware that bringing an unasked for sacrifice, we saw by Dosan and Aviram, Aaron's sons, when they did this without command, without specifically being asked to do so, it's a death penalty. To bring keteris, the sacrifice, to bring the incense sacrifice when it's not asked for, carries a death penalty. So you think you're worthy, go ahead, but be aware, right? And there were 250 men by now who were so worked up about this desire to bring the Keteris, to bring the service to God, that they were absolutely committed to do this. That evening, Moses and some of those with him go from tent to tent, to try and convince the people this is suicide. Separate yourselves from Korach and from his rebellion, and just don't go here. It's just not worth it. And try as he might, it didn't work. And Dathan and Aviram, he tried to speak with them. They wouldn't even speak with him. So as much as Moshe tried, there was no stopping this rebellion here. So in the morning, Korach and his 250 followers, they show up with this dispute with their own copper vessels and incense, and they come closer to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, to bring the sacrifice, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the cloud of glory, covers over the Oil Moed, the holy part of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and God commands Moses to command the people, separate yourself from the rest of this rebellious people, and I will consume them in an instant. Now, initially, God's anger is kindled against all Jewish people because they were the 250 followers of Korach who rebelled, but where were the rest of the people? Where were the rest of the million Jews? Were they not stopping this? Were they not trying to intervene and stop this whole event going on? Because they didn't try to stop it, so in that sense they're complicit to it, and God is going to basically, again, he wants to wipe out everybody and start over again with Moshe and Aaron and their family and tribe. And Moshe's tefillah, his prayer to God, was, an earthly king has a rebellion. He doesn't know what's in the mind of each person. And therefore, he may have to punish more than actually deserve it to quelch the rebellion, because he doesn't know who's actually responsible. But God knows the thoughts of man. And Moses prays to God, you know the thoughts of mankind. You know who's guilty here and who just got carried along in the mob mentality, right? And we've seen that too many times in our own generation, mob mentality. God, you know whose thoughts are guilty and who just got caught up in the excitement of the mob and the day. Don't punish the crowd. Punish only the individuals who are actually guilty in their thoughts of rebellion against Moses and Aaron and against God, because essentially Moses and Aaron are only servants of God doing what God commanded. So the rebellion is really against God himself. And God accepted Moshe's tefillah, his prayer, and he would forgive the rest of the people at this moment. And so then God tells them, separate yourself from the crowd and tell everybody else to separate from this crowd because they're going to be punished. And Moses then wants this to be a final statement, to stop everything here, right? To really help everybody understand how dire the consequences here. And he prays to God that make this a unique death unlike anything that's happened before. Don't let these people that are guilty die a natural death, like 40 years in the wilderness and you'll die a natural death. No, these people, let them die a unique death in front of everyone else so everyone else will get it and quelch this whole nonsense. And let the earth swallow them up. And this is exactly what happens. The earth opens up and it swallows down Korach and his 250 rebellious people and Dathan and Aviram and their crowds. They all get swallowed up at the same time. And the earth closes up above them, right? And they get sucked right down into the earth. And so this brazen strife is against Moshe and Aaron, and obviously then against God, is now completed. And Moses then turns around and addresses the rest of Klal Yisrael. Well, you've now seen proof that everything I did was by divine command. I didn't take this position myself. Aaron was established as the Kohen, and Kohen Gadol, and his sons as Kohanim, and the rest, and Elitzaph as the head of Bnei Kahas. All of these things I've done directly at the command of God, directly at the command of the Almighty. None of this was my own doing. This is exactly as God commanded. And so here is the proof, right? So there was no trace of these men themselves left, just the copper vessels that were brought for the incense. Now, of course, those copper vessels for the incense, those shovels that we're using to burn the incense, those have been used to serve God, and so they're holy, and so they can't be used for anything else. So Moshe then commands them to gather. He commands the Levium to gather those pans together, and take those pans and pound them into, melt them down and pound them into one big sheet, and use that copper to cover the altar in the tabernacle, the altar in the tabernacle outside of the holy, not the small incense one that's made of gold, but the big earthen altar that will be covered with copper, and it'll be the copper from these 250 incense pieces there. Now, the incident is over. We'd like to think the incident is over, but what happens is that comes morning, the people are distraught and stressed because there's just been so much loss, and without thinking through it, they actually turn around and blame the incense offering, not what Korach and Dastan and Aviram, not what they did in their rebellion, but they blame the incense for the problem. And because they blame the incense and they start complaining again about the situation, so because of their complaining and because of their complaining about the incense, and they're blaming all of this death on Moses, so God releases the angel of death to strike the people with a plague. All these whiners and complainers who are blaming the sac, and Moses tries to pray to God, but his power of speech is taken from him, and the plague starts spreading, and thousands are dying in the camp. And Moses then turns to Aaron, and he says, "Quickly, take the sacred pan for offering the keteris, the incense. Take burning coals from the outside altar and heap keteris upon the coals, and then run out to the camp and let the smoke of the keteris, let that smoke ascend to heaven, and it will stop the plague." It's interesting that it's the keteris that they complained about that is exactly the same keteris that would be the one to actually save them and stop the plague from going. And again, we have the question of, what about bringing unrequired or unrequested sacrifices of keteris? That was part of the problem in the beginning. But this is Moses who's commanding Aaron. Aaron is initially concerned. Wait a minute, this, what about bringing requested keteris spices? Incense has a death penalty, and Moses says, "Do it. We're wasting time. Every moment, someone's dying." And so, with self-sacrifice, committed to do whatever Moses says needs to be done. So Aaron runs with the shovel, and he collects the ashes, and he puts on the keteris, and he runs out to the middle of the camp, and the keteris separates between the living and the dead and stops the Malach HaMavos, the angel of death, in his tracks, and it stops right here. Now, obviously, everything is by divine will, but again, it's the keteris, it's the special sacrifices that changes the divine will to stop the plague itself as well. So, again, another disaster is averted from getting even worse by Moses and by Aaron, and by understanding what we need to do to actually serve God and be careful about that. Moses then takes another step forward to try and help people understand that God chooses who the leaders are and not himself. And he asks each of the heads of the 12 tribes to bring their staff. Each one has their own staff. Bring your staff. And he wraps their staffs up together, binds them together. He puts Aaron's staff in the middle of them and surrounds the others around his staff. And he puts it in these dead wood walking staffs, and he puts it into the kodesh, the holy of the tabernacle, and he leaves it there overnight. And in the morning, Aaron's staff has blossomed, flourishing with blossoms and almonds. Almonds is one of the fastest growing species, and so his staff overnight, it blossoms. This dead wood staff blossoms with fresh leaves and fresh fruit and fresh almonds and ripened almonds. It happens all overnight. Again, showing that God chose Aaron to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and that his tribe is selected to be the priestly tribe. And this is the bulk of the story of this week's Parsha of Korach. It ends with a further confirmation of the Levium and the Kohanim and their responsibilities. There are 24 gifts that the Jewish people bring to the Kohanim, to the priestly tribe. When we bring sacrifices to God, whether that's an animal chata, sin sacrifice, a guilt offering, whether that's a shlomim, a whole offering, with all the different karbonos that we bring to God, whether that's from the animals, or it's from the plant kingdom, like flour or grains, or whether it's oil, or whether it's wine, all of these things that we bring to the Beis Hamikdash, there are 24 of them that a part of that sacrifice is then brought to the temple, given to God, and the Kohanim are given a piece of what is presented to God. That is a gift that God gives to the Kohanim for their service. This is a gift from the Jewish people for the Kohanim who do the service for the Jewish people for God in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and then in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple itself in Jerusalem. This week's parsha, we talk about the redemption of the firstborn son, that just as God saved the firstborn in Egypt when the plague went out against us, God saved the firstborn. So God tells the Jewish people that if you have a firstborn son, Peterechem, who opens the womb, not born of cesarean, not born after, God forbid, a miscarriage, but every firstborn son who opens the womb, this child has to be redeemed. He belongs to the Kohanim, who are taking his place, and so he has to be redeemed. And you redeem them. There's a whole process for redeeming the five silver shekels have to be redeeming the firstborn son. There's a whole process for that one. But again, the whole purpose here is to signify that God has chosen the Kohanim, the priestly tribe, to be in our stead, to stand before us for God. We honor them. The Kohanim are honored with the first aliyah every time we have reading of the Torah. The Levium are honored with the second aliyah every time we read the Torah. And again, we show our respect and our understanding that God has separated night and day. God has separated the Jewish people from the rest of the nations. God has separated the Levium from amongst the Jewish people. God has separated the Kohanim from amongst the Levium. And God has separated one Kohen Gadol, one high priest, to serve him in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple in Jerusalem. And we acknowledge that this is all by God's decree. And we each have our place, and when we fulfill our divine mission individually, then collectively, as a whole, we bring about a change in the universe. Have a fantastic week. I hope this was helpful. Bye-bye. Good Shabbos.